Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm delighted to see so many people that were here at the service have stayed after. I am delighted to have Dr. Fredrica Thompsett with us. As you all know, this is the question of same-sex blessings came up in a very difficult way for us almost a year ago at St. Andrews. And as many of you know, Fredrica and I don't see eye to eye on this or agree about conclusions, but I deeply value her ministry in the church and what she is bringing to us, and hopefully helping to create space for us to talk to one another about where we come from, why we see things the way that we do, and how we can be a community of the kingdom of God to everyone who steps in the doors of St. Andrews. So Fredrica, thank you for being with us this morning, and we are delighted to have you lead us today.
Thank you. And I will not... I'm not going to be here overly long because it's a great day to work in the garden.
Amen.
I mean, I adore this kind of weather. The occasion that brought me here, and Peter's heard me talk about this before, is that I was asked by the presiding bishop, Bishop Catherine Jeffrey Shorey, to write a book that would encourage people to look at the issue of same-sex blessings. I serve with her on the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, which is like the vestry is to a parish, the Executive Council is to the National Church. So we're fooling around with an $82 million budget, which is another story, but we're letting that go alongside. But meanwhile, she said, would you put together a book of texts and documents that would encourage people to think and to have conversations about same-sex blessings. So I did it. There are sermons in here, there's short articles, and because I'm not trying to make money off of folks, I have copies of 2 of the articles for you to take home, 4 pages each. I teach the students in adult education. 4 pages is plenty for an adult Episcopalian. Don't give them a book. You know? The ironic thing about me writing a book about this is that sexuality was the one thing that we never talked about in my family. Never. Now, why that was odd was my mother was an actress. I mean, a legit actress. She was on Broadway in the 30s, and she was a fairly outlandish woman. I mean, so I must have had some of her genes somewhere to go ahead and become a theologian. But so we talked about lots of things. We talked about plays. We talked about mysteries. We talked about human nature, but we did not talk about sexuality. My father was an attorney. He was Mr. Ford, Henry Ford I's attorney throughout his career, and he said, well, Fredrica, you know, it's really all right, whatever people do. You know, your mother ran around with all these people in the theater. It took me a while to figure out who all these people were, but I did. He said, but they're fine. I like them. They're fine. Just don't talk about it. This is a guy who was loquacious barrister. A judge tried cases and all kinds of situations. So, this is designed, and as Peter indicates, we're not on the. We have differences of opinion on this. I have participated in same-sex blessings. I have preached. I have not been. I do not have a relationship that is blessed to be blessed that way. But I have been friends of many, and am there to stand up and say this is a very good thing, and it's a timely thing. Because yesterday was the 10th anniversary of the Goodrich decision in Massachusetts, in which Justice Margaret Marshall, herself from South Africa, took that clue and said, no, we've got to treat people the same. Going back to the 14th Amendment in terms of due diligence and treatment under the law. So I want to share with you a couple things that open it up for some conversation. Give you, if you would wish to take them, 2 4-page, already Xeroxed chapters from this book to take home and read, and see if we can have some conversation. But first, let me just give you some information that may be recent. Now, this is the time when I ask for white-coated ushers to come forward. And so Peter's going to have to be one.
Bill can be another.
And Bill's already volunteered because to be another. And if we end at the back, there's one going around. I may have run out of blue. Just one. You don't need the white. It's the same thing. If we run out of the blue, then we go to the white.
Take my way.
So why don't you go to the back and start there? Yeah. I color sheets typically. I only did 30 of them, and I don't know how many we have here today.
There's 50 total of both.
Typically, I color sheets because when I'm working with students and handing things out, they say which page. I say the blue sheet. You know, this is low technology for highly intelligent people. So I took some quotes, and I just want to show you a little bit of a timeline and some recent statistics. And then share some guidelines with you for conversations, and then have your questions. So these are going around. Everybody working their way through it? I mean, that is have one. So as long as you have a blue or a white sheet, you're writing. Okay? So things to think about. To add to your already thinking about the matter of same-sex blessings, which in the Episcopal Church, the service that we are providing now calls it a same-sex covenant. It doesn't call it a service of marriage. And I'll say why in a minute. First thing I thought about, I went to your website, and there it was, under worship. At St. Andrews by the Sea, there are no strangers. All are welcome. And I was reminded of that this morning when we had, and thank you, Peter, for the sermon of seeing the Father through Jesus. That's a wonderful image. But we also read the section in John about in my Father's house there used to be mansions. Yeah. Now there are many dwelling places. The Greek is actually, in my Father's house there is room enough for all. So when you work that, when you go, I mean, I have enough Greek to mess around with the Gospels, as I'm sure Peter does too. In my Father's house, there is room enough for all. Isn't that a splendid thing? So that's the position that has been undergirding many of the actions of the Episcopal Church in the last 40 to 50 years. I've just written another book about the effect of women's ordination on the Episcopal Church. We are now celebrating 40 years of having ordained women in the church, ordained women's leadership, which I celebrated it 40 years ago, and I want to know how the church has changed. And one of the things that's happened is that more people are seeing more diversity and different kinds of folks welcome in the church. And there's a reason for that. We say as Episcopalians that our liturgy shapes what we do and what we believe, that our liturgy gives us ways to move and informs what we then do. If you look at number 2 here, in 1976, that was the year we adopted the prayer book, the new prayer book that we have. Now, my students call it the old one, but there you go. There you go. At the year that we adopted that prayer book, and it was the year the Episcopal Church first declared its full pastoral support for gay and lesbian people. Now, why am I connecting the prayer book with that event? The reason I am is the prayer book put baptism and the authority of laity back into the lives of the Episcopal Church. It put baptism in the central service, if that's at all possible, so it happens among us. It wrote a set of promises called the Baptismal Covenant, again going back and using that ancient form of a yoked agreement between two sides or two parts. Respecting the dignity of all. Will you respect the dignity of all people? So that book started to shape a more open understanding. It also said that the ministers of the church are lay people, deacons, priests, and bishops, and in that order. So more and more conversation about all of us being needed in the church happened with the advent of the 1976 prayer book. And so what has followed is opening up a different variety of experiences than many in the church have had before. Barbara Harris, my bishop in Massachusetts, bounces off of that in one of her statements. How can you initiate somebody in the body of Christ and then treat them as if they're half baptized? So a lot of the formation for opening up and possibilities of full membership comes out of that baptismal foundation. We might not have remembered it if we were infants at the time. Of course, we don't remember it. But we now know, through ancient study of texts recently come to our light, that in the phrase that in baptism there is no slave, no male, no female, no slave, no free, no Greek, nor Jew, that was part of the early declaration of the communion service. We now know that that message of radical hospitality was in the earliest communions, as we would call them, or Eucharists as we would call them today. So not only the Episcopal Church, but other churches have moved to a more expansive notion that in the church there is room enough for all. So number 4, in 2012, we're just going to jump here. The General Convention voted to approve a service for the blessing of a same-sex covenant. And it's on a trial use. Any of you remember before we had the new prayer book, we went through a whole bunch of other books. They were yellow and green and zebra or whatever. If you remember it, forget it. We try things. The Episcopal Church tries things on and then tries to get them right. Tries to see if they're working. So this trial use of a same-sex covenant, the blessing of a same-sex covenant, was what was proposed at the last General Convention in 2012. And we'll be trying that out for 6 years. And parishes and others are trying it out. Now, why call it a covenant? Why not call it marriage? Well, interestingly enough, there have been a lot of debates about marriage and what's the legal role of the church in performing marriages. So instead of using the word marriage, they're now in the church for the next 8 years studying a theology of marriage, trying to see what we understand by that sacramental rite, if you will. Not one of the 2 great sacraments, but it's a sacramental rite. So is that, well, look, we're talking about a blessing, and we bless all kinds of things: hounds, ships, new books, new ornaments at the altar, new rooms in the back. I gather that lovely space
That's coming.
Is going to be blessed. Why can we not bless a relationship that is founded in love? So we're talking about committed people bound in love. We're not talking about people who are have heinous acts in mind in terms of same-sex blessings. So we're trying this on, when we try things on, we try to have conversations about what it means. And so a colleague of mine, an African-American theologian, now singing in the heavenly choir, Dr. Werner Dozier, says, don't just tell me what you believe, tell me what you think about you're going to do because you believe. So that is an invitation to a conversation, an action and a conversation to become engaged on the subject. So one theological strand that has encouraged the Episcopal Church to welcome all people and then open up its liturgical rites to gay and blessing of gay and lesbian committed couples is the baptismal covenant. In fact, when we were doing the ordination of women and people were arguing against it, there was a saying out there, which the Roman Catholics, by the way, are now using, either ordain them or stop baptizing them. In other words, once you become a full member, that's what baptism is, a full member in the body of Christ, you don't hoard the sacraments and keep them away from people. So that baptismal foundation, little theology lesson. Only 2, well, I'll use 3 theological words if you let me. Baptismal rite, okay. The second comes out of this next quotation from Bishop Kinsley, who I gather was here at a forum on religion and science, a packed forum, and this is a quote from his presentation. Religion has something to say about the sacredness of life and how human beings are because we are made in the image of God. Being made in the image of God, made incarnate, made flesh in the image of God as Jesus was made flesh in God's image, is the other theological belief. Lives matter, people matter, bodies matter. The material world matters, the bread matters, the wine matters, the water matters, human beings matter. So the sacredness of life and all is important, and as are human beings. So that's from Bishop. That's the second. That's the notion of incarnation, to use one of those big theological words. A lot of the arguments, and I'm going just through this quickly, and then we can have some questions and stuff, and I'll show you another thing. How we doing? Okay? This is too much? Am I? All right? You know. Yeah, that's right. Okay, there. Just check. Bishop Lane, Maine basically went through, the state of Maine, recently went through a vote that now allows same-sex partnerships, licenses for partnerships. And Bishop Stephen Lane said, I think many of us agree that, and this is kind of some of the language that's used in the blessing service, stable, long-term, faithful relationships benefit the whole of society by providing social stability and trustworthy environment for raising children. I believe that society will benefit if we include more of our community in marriage. That was part of his argument before the State House and the people of Maine. I think we're going to come out. I've seen some of the initial papers on marriage with a resounding and wonderful understanding and deeper understanding of marriage out of the papers in the Episcopal Church. And, you know, that's a bit of our history. Thomas Cranmer, who wrote our first prayer books, sorry, a little historical note here, was the first to say that in the prayer book language, the couples were to be bound by affection and love. It was first put that in the marriage service. It replaced a prayer that the wife be buxom and bonny in bed. So you can add that to your service. But I mean, it was first in that marriage service to say it's not just for the procreation of children. It's not just a remedy of sin. It's for a loving, affectionate relationship. And he was himself married, though she disappeared.
Secretly.
So I hope she was bonny and buxom in bed. But, not going to go there. So why have we had this resistance to opening up marriage? Well, there are many reasons. And I'm sure Peter has told you some, and some theologically, how it works from his. The Goodrich decision, the decision 10 years ago, yesterday actually, that opened Massachusetts, your nearby neighbor, and the whole of New England, gradually. We now have 18 states, and 5 others are considering, to opening up the licensing for same-sex marriages. Comes out of, and here's the language that comes out of Goodrich. The marriage ban works a deep and scarring hardship on a very real segment of community for no rational reason. This is Margaret Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. The absence of any reasonable relationship between, on the one hand, an absolute disqualification of same-sex couples who wish to enter into marriage, and on the other, it says the health of the folks, I'm sorry I omitted it there, suggests that marriage restriction is rooted in persistent prejudice. When I talk with Barbara Harris, the African-American first woman bishop in the Episcopal Church, she sees what's happening in terms of gay-lesbian inclusion as a follow-up to what happened with the civil rights. We're opening more and more doors, and we're being clear about who are our fellow human beings that we must value. So we all know in society that it's becoming more and more, I think if you read the news, if not tolerable to all of you, familiar to many of you that same-sex folks are allowed to have the value of marriage and the value of a marriage license. And I want to say something personally. My husband died very young. And I have had a partnership with a woman who has since died for 25 years. I had to work. She was in a wheelchair the last 3 years of her life. I had to work with a lawyer to guarantee that I could get to see her, that I could pay her bills, that I could take care of her person, that I could get into the hospital. These are very, very pragmatic legal issues. They were extraordinarily painful. Dorothy died in 2001, that wonderful week of September 11th. She died in that wonderful week. And it was extraordinary. My friend Charlene can tell you about that. But I had to cover literally every legal agreement. And so that if something happened to me, because I was her care, the money could go to her. But I had to get in and fight for access to her hospital room and access to her care. So there's some very, very practical reasons. I think if same-sex blessings had been available at the time, we would have said, well, the horse is out of the barn, you know? I mean, we've been together for 25 years. But the community wanted to celebrate that relationship. And many communities do, and I would have changed my mind. We were asked about it many times if we wanted to do that. Sooner or later, we would have gotten it. So there's just some theological thoughts and some little legal statements. Here's some statistical statements. 40% of the U.S. population now live in states that embrace marriage equality. A record 59% say they support same-sex marriage, while 34% are opposed. So we're obviously talking about a controversial issue, one that we have to learn to speak about. Here's some information. Nearly 2/3 of the people born after 1981 say they support same-sex marriage. This is double the percentage of their elders in the so-called silent generation, born between 1928 and 1945. Any number of us born? We're not too silent. I don't know why we're called the silent generation. I would have looked that up. But 2/3, 70% of those born after 1981 say, under 30, 70% of those born under 30 say they support it. It's a non-issue in a lot of places, and it keeps young people out of our churches. Just got to say that. It keeps them out of our churches. If we say we are welcoming all, if we say that baptism is full membership in the body of Christ, what's going on? So one of the essays I have to give you, just 4 pages again, like a good-sized New York Times column, if you want to do that. Is by a wonderful woman named Stephanie Spellers, who's a canon for mission and development in Rhode Island. She's an African-American presbyter, and she talks about what is happening with the younger folks and this particular issue. Just 4 pages on that. So that's one. The other document that I'm going to give you is a story by a theologian named Patrick Chang, who is a very quiet Chinese American, a gay man whose wedding was blessed. He's an ordained Episcopal clergy. And he tells the story of his parents' reaction to what was going on. And it's a difficult story, but it's also a story of grace. And that's the story that the word he uses over and over again in his essay. See, what I'm thinking about is when we talk about this, it's our stories that matter, that make the difference. It's our experience that opens us up to those wild people that my mother was in plays with in the 1930s. Those Del and Dan came to my wedding. They were wonderful actors. They became florists after their acting career. I never knew that that they shouldn't be welcome in my home. And I would love to have had them welcome in my church. They were welcome at my wedding when my husband and I were as well. So part of it is our experiences, what builds us up. Now, talking about it, that's a different thing. Can I just say a few things about talking about it, and then we'll open it up to questions? Okay? So, again, white-coated ushers. Thank you, Bill.
My pleasure.
You will be met well at the early days. It might give you something to hand out. So you gotta be careful about that, you know.
Thank you.
So one of the things to think about is nobody is forced to do a same-sex blessing. We are clearly trying things on the way we always try things on in the Episcopal Church. Nobody is forced to do that. And it's clearly an event about which we have to open our minds and have some conversations if we're going to disagree with one another. Otherwise, we're going to think we don't respect one another. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, all. So, you either need a green sheet or a white. Or you can have 2 white sheets. You got it? You need a blue? I'll hand you the documents afterwards. Yeah. Is that in listening is key and trying not to interrupt. But I. To be committed, if you enter into these conversations, to speaking with others and to speaking for yourself. Not for the whole of humankind, not for your neighbor, not perhaps even for your wife. There are disagreements in couples. But speaking for yourself and assuming there are no right answers or wrong answers, no winners or losers. If we don't share our ideas about this and feelings, we're not going to move as a happy church forward. There's going to be some disrespect or depression or debate. So the most important point is your respect for one another if you enter into these conversations. Later on, my father did apologize and enter into conversations with me, and he loved my partner Dorothy for many, many years, and it was a joy to watch that. One result of our conversations, this is from parishes in San Diego and Arkansas, our willingness to address the difficult, controversial subjects candidly without blame or defense became the blessing of our work. We became better informed and more sensitive and respectful to each other as persons of a common faith. I mean, it's hard to have the SEX conversation with your kids when you first had it, right? Not even easier to have this one. So here are a few questions. And you'll notice that 1 and 7 are fairly familiar. They both have to do with celebrations. If we enter into a conversation, I believe, that isn't going to give us any joy or anything to celebrate in the long run, we're doing ourselves a disfavor. Let me say that again. If we enter into a conversation that isn't going to give us as a community, a congregation, any joy, any cause for celebration in the long run, we're doing ourselves a disfavor. If you enter into a conversation about this, and you think, oh my gosh, we're going to hell in a handbasket, that's not a great way to proceed. So one of the things about this parish, if you're in this parish, or other parishes if you're in other parishes, and I know Lavinia is with my friend John Higginbotham off there, so, is to think about what in your current parish life are causes for celebration. What do you really want to hold up and say, here's where we stand? And then, a second question, what is a blessing? What does that mean to you? See, that's what we're really asking. We're asking with this right for a blessing. So what does it mean when you're blessed? When a room is blessed? When a chasuble is blessed? When a dog is blessed? What is God doing? What are we doing with God in that particular activity. There's some other questions, and these are just questions I wouldn't do all 7 of them in a half-hour conversation, but these are things to pick and choose from. How has the church's teaching about marriage changed over the centuries? What has stayed the same? What has prompted change? We're talking about a change. We admit that. So, how has our teaching about marriage changed? Well, we no longer say that the wife could be Bonnie and buxom in bed. What else? What else? Clergy can now in the Episcopal Church divorce. Lay can divorce. That was a big change in the 50s. Extraordinary. Many of us have lived through the pain of that, and friends and family have. That's not an easy thing. That's a huge change, and a gigantic biblical prescriptions against divorce. So, it's tricky. Then, what changes in attitudes about homosexuality have you seen in the recent years? So I'm trying to gradually get you into that water. Celebration, blessing, change, and then what are you seeing in your own mind? What kind of relationships, and now I'm pressing it a little, these are getting a little harder, if you will. What kind of relationships can be holy? That's another way, that's another word. Because what a marriage rite does, or a covenant rite does, or a blessing rite does, is say that God is at work in this relationship. And we pray that God will continue to be at work in this relationship. We'll have the character of holiness, wholesomeness, fullness, abundance. Then what experiences have you had that have influenced you to look again at relationship of gay couples in the church? I remember a friend told me a story about a young male couple who had adopted twins, a boy and a girl. I'm a twin, so I'm always clued up to thinking about twin questions. I have a twin brother. And they adopted twin boys, and they brought them to be baptized through their parish church. And the priest refused to bless the twins. This is in Massachusetts. It's about 12 years ago. He refused to. There was something about the evilness in him of those children that he would not bless. They were adopted by these two gentlemen. At that point, and I teach a lot about baptism and its role in our life, I just had to commit myself in deep prayer. What in the world with a joyous, wonderful pair of twins? Why keep them from God's grace? So some of that passion has infused my passion for same-sex blessings, if you will, for forming a same-sex covenant. That just stays, that reality, that story stays in my heart. And then with the 100th anniversary of this parish, what shared values, achievements, and vitality do you wish to herald and celebrate as you move into that? And I think anniversaries are not only about the past, they're about the future. And that's why I put that there. And my experience, and I don't know yours, is that if something is gnawing at the craw of our conversations, it has to be addressed, because other things will start to go downhill as well. I don't know whether same-sex blessings is the tip of an iceberg of concerns you have with one another. I don't know that. But I know it's important that those things that get in the way of Christian people being Christian communities are worthy of conversation. So what I would suggest to you is that, I'll give you 2 documents. You can hand them out at the rear. The ushers need not fear they'll be called on again, because they are 8 pages and heavy to lift. Like that. And you see if either one of those documents, those short stories, is something you want to discuss as a small group. You've set some guidelines for that. Or you want to address a couple of these questions in the small group. The advantage being that you hear somebody speak for him or herself, you don't interrupt, and then you move faithfully and quietly together. This book has stories of parishes who have gone through this conversation in Arkansas, which was not an easy turn in that part of the Southwest. and in Maryland, but I could have picked other stories. So that's my presentation. That's my presentation. So what I'd love now is some questions and some comments. Right? Conversation. Questions. Comments. Yes.
I had a rather, I've told some of my friends here this, but I had a rather very moving experience many years ago. I was working in the hospital. One of my students I was very fond of, I thought she was perhaps gay. They didn't talk about these things then.
Right.
And there was another young intern who was going out with a wonderful gal. They seemed very happy, and suddenly this intern was going out with this gal that I knew, and I thought that was interesting. And it turned out they had gotten together and realized they both were gay, and that what they would do was get married and adopt children that nobody else would adopt. So they adopted 2 handicapped daughters and 2 handicapped sons, and they were together, I think, at least 5 years, and they realized, much as they cared for each other, respected each other, this just didn't work. So they split up. She went off with the girls, he went with the boys, and I think he found a partner. I don't know whether she ever did. But they kept up their friendship. But it was just, this is something they asked for. This is what was given them.
No, and there's no guarantee that any of our relationships will last, except I think parish community really helps. I mean, I was married in a church. I never had that chance with Dorothy. The parish that when Bruce died, I was supported and nurtured by the seminary where I taught when my husband died. I mean, there's something about being in community with others that doesn't put all the pressure on that particular relationship and marriage. And I value. I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. I mean, I'm a real emotional slob when it comes to the Episcopal Church. I wouldn't have studied it and taught it all these years if that wasn't the case. Community matters. Community matters. Yes. Question back here.
Yeah. How do you see the Bible fitting into all of this?
It's a really good question. There are different ways of studying Scripture. And many of us approach it as, I think Peter does, as divinely inspired, and that's, I wouldn't debate that. They're reading biblical texts. Most of the texts that try to speak distinctly about this issue are really talking about male prostitution. We now know that they had trouble talking about sex. Let's put that out. So the biblical scholars who are now doing critical reading of these texts say that this was, that the gospel of love and relationship is much more stronger than these very, very obscure texts in Paul and others that are primarily talking about male prostitution, which was a sin.
The Garden of Eden in Genesis, and God creates man and woman, and they complement one another, and it just keeps going, and it's always a man and a woman.
Yeah.
In there.
Right, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Right. All I can say is we're now learning that sexuality and is a bit of a continuum. That sometimes people are attracted to men who are men and to women who are women. And that it's no longer a disease, but it's a relationship that can be profoundly long, lasting, and loving. So I don't think we're repudiating Adam and Eve. Eve is one of my favorite gals to talk about. She's pretty spunky, actually. But saying that there are different understandings of sexuality among animals, among cultures. Margaret Mead discovered that, if any of you read her years ago, among tribes. So we're opening that up. Yes?
Why can't a marriage be a marriage between male and female, and a blessing be like a marriage, but be a blessing instead of a marriage? I mean, why can't you do that?
That's where we are right now, Judy. I mean, that is a marriage. Is called a marriage, and we're talking about blessing a covenant at this point, not a marriage. Susan?
At one of your talks that we had that was done at PDS, there were a great many people, same-sex committed couples.
Mhm.
And they had a lot of anger about it because they kept saying, this is not the same. I mean, people go into a church and get married, and we go in and get this blessing. We don't get the same treatment, and we are as equal. So we have to think about that, Judy. You know, when we're talking, we have to say, are we giving them something that isn't as equal? Perhaps it is. Perhaps maybe marriage should be a covenant too. I mean, you know, it is a covenant.
It is.
It is a covenant, but it's not just called that. So, you know, I'm just saying the other side. I was shocked at the real anger coming from these people because I thought, ooh, you know, we're moving forward, but we're not moving forward for them fast enough.
The way this country has organized itself around marriage is around the dispersal of rights and property. Marriage has always been, the history of marriage is not grand. Let me just put it out there. It's always been about property. And it's about property of a woman, property of land, property of So in this country, our land rights, our owning rights, our inheritance rights come through a marriage as property, which is why I had to do so much work to be able to intervene in support Dorothy's life. Because legally, I didn't have the right to walk into that hospital room. I didn't have the right to make sure my inheritance went to her without being challenged by my family. So there's where some of the anger comes. So I think thinking about marriage and what we really, as a Christian community, as a community of faithful people, what we really want to invest in marriage, I think is extraordinary. I think we're moving. It may feel an awkward way to move. Well, first we'll do same-sex blessings and then we'll do marriage. But our hand was sort of prompted by some secular events. We're moving in that direction to find out. You know, I have friends who struggle to keep their access to their children. Legally, when Dorothy and I were in Cambridge, we signed a statement saying we were domestic partners. Why? Because we could then have, and those could then have access to children. Otherwise, we couldn't have access to our children. We didn't have any, but if we had, in the public schools. It was only the parents. See where the anger, it's a question of rights that are state inscribed, if you will, and responsibilities that come from our life as Christians. And it's a very complex stew. So I'm not pretending in any way this is simple, but it is painful. It is painful. So Barbara says, you know, you're going to be half baptized, you know, not baptized completely. Are you going to admit them to the rights? Are you going to be half married? What's that? Yeah. So that's why we're pushing the envelope on that too. That's why we're pushing the envelope. Yes.
I think that, you know, we talk over and over again, our record preaches to us over and over again about the love of God and that God loves us, that we're in His image, that so how can we possibly deny people the same rights and so forth and conventions because of their sexuality? And I also think that if we don't welcome everybody to this church, look at this church. We're a church of gray-haired people. We really are looking.
You're okay.
Well, for the most part, we're an older congregation. How are we going to draw young people to this church when we are not offering the same rights, and I'm talking about R-I-T-E-S, to everybody? I just think it's a terrible, it's a terrible picture of our church that we're not doing that. So I feel pretty emotional about this, but
It's an emotional matter.
yeah.
It's an emotional matter for people all across the world. But if we don't talk about it, we don't get through that. And we don't say, you know, you really, you know, speaking for myself, I will feel really hurt when I hear you say that, you know, all homosexual men and homosexual male couples are prostitutes. I can't stand that. I can't hear that. You know, that's painful. My friends, my family, my own partner. What's going on there? Yeah. In the word that always draws me back to the gospel is it's a Hebrew word. Am I allowed to use a Hebrew word?
Of course you are.
I use Greek either, so I'm trying. Hesed, H-E-S-E-D. It's the word that is used in every covenantal relationship in what we call the Old Testament, the First Testament. The Hesed of God, and it's the steadfast loving kindness of God. That's what binds a couple, a covenant together. Not that if you do this, I'll do that. Not, a partnership that some lawyers would work on. But the steadfast loving kindness of God. That's what brings Moses to his people. That's what Ruth and her decisions are accomplished. That's what we're promised in Isaiah. So that's the overarching. It's about God's steadfast loving kindness. And our reading of that always not so. The church is not always way ahead of the pack. But the Episcopal Church is. Yeah, right. But we learn and we move, and we're much more expansive and joyous in many of our relationships than we've been in years past. When my mother and father, the school that I've been teaching at for the last, what are we now, 35 years, 40 years, almost 40 years? 40 years, I guess. I first heard about because my mother, who was teaching the Seabury series, do you ever remember that? It was a series for going through teaching children Christian education. I met Moses many times in that. And my mother was a teacher in that. And she said, well, there's a school out in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they're saying that people who find that they have to move toward divorce are not sinners. She said, isn't that interesting? As a child of 10 years old, I remember hearing that story about the school where I would then teach for the next 40 years. That we shunned people, that we wouldn't let them have communion, that we, in effect, kept those twins from being baptized. It's tough. It's a lot of change, but it's also a lot of heart, and it's emotional work, and that's what we're supposed to have some skills with in our parish community. Yeah.
This is a comment with a question, or maybe a complaint.
Yeah.
I think to me, it's so painful to experience the split in this parish that I love so much. And I miss people who have left for one reason or another. It's really, it just really hurts. That's all. That's all I have to say.
I think that's an important statement to make. I really do, because in my experience, when issues, in quote, drive us apart, other things start to drive us apart. And that's where, if you're going to celebrate 100 years together, better work and figure out what's keeping you apart from one another. That's hard work. I mean, I told you I'm a hopelessly romantic, lifelong Episcopalian, and I fall in love with the parishes I belong to. And I fall in love with them because of the people in those parishes. Clergy, with all due respect for Peter, do not run parishes. Clergy come and go in parishes. Well, I mean, they may run it.
Clergy are people too.
Thank you, Pete. We try to be.
But, I mean, how many of you were here before Peter? You may, I mean, God willing, unless something sudden happens. I mean, there may be Peter may do something else, or you may do something else. But, I mean, there's something about Dorothy's ashes are at my parish at St. Barnabas and Falmouth. I will not leave that parish, and I will work for it to be the most successful parish it can be. Because I found joy there, I found comfort there, I found community there, and I found deep friendships there. So, I grieve for your pain, and I'm sorry for the division. It's time to lift it up, have the conversation, and move toward what you can celebrate and worship the King. It's hard work.
That's your
You have my prayers. You're a pleasure.
It's hard and it's painful.
It's hard and it's painful, Phil. Yes. It's hard and it's painful.
I have a dear friend who was head of school in Seattle. He lived his whole life in the shadows. He came out to me and he said, don't believe anybody who tells you that it's easy to be gay. It's terrible. And to have been taught in this church by Abear, vocals, love everybody, include them. Very hard to see this split.
And you have an opportunity now. I mean, I knew Jerry Wolf as a student. She was in school. The last thing she ever wanted to do was touch a controversy. I met this kid would just not go anywhere. I said, historically, we've got a controversy around the Nicene Creed. It won by a few votes. But you don't want to go anywhere near it. Okay? You've got a bishop that says, let's get on with it. Let's talk about this. Let's make this work. So you have Episcopal approval. You have a state that has made some decisions. You have each other. You have a church you care about and people you care about.
But as B said, we've already gotten smaller with people we treasure.
So what do you have to celebrate? And what can you build on that celebration? Your relationships with those of you who are here now, your honest conversations with one another.
I got a lot to celebrate, but maybe I should go across the street. There's certainly issue.
We all make our. One of the things I love about the Episcopal Church is you get intelligent preaching. You know? And you respect the minds of the people. So I'm trying to be sympathetic, but you've got to make your decisions on this. Me, I'm a sticker. And what's here to build upon? What's here to open? What goodwill have you for one another? What honest things can you say to one another and not try to hurt one another? I don't think you are trying to hurt one another. But sometimes feelings get in the way and all that. Yes.
You know, in a time when traditions seem to melt around us and so on, it strikes me that marriage is a very live, very powerful, the wedding industrial complex. People are drawn to weddings, to marriage, and I think we all experience emotion at a wedding. I was interested, I attended my brother-in-law's marriage in an Episcopal service at Trinity College to his male partner of 20 years. And there were friends of theirs from San Francisco who had come. And to see them be moved by this service. And to stand in front of the gathering and say how much they admired this couple for their commitment to each other. And the example they set in their San Francisco community. They wanted to be joined together. And I think that helps the community, as you had alluded earlier, to everybody can feel celebrated by the whole community, gay and heterosexual, and everyone is there celebrating their commitment to each other. I think it was moving for me, and I think
It can be and is for many of us extraordinarily moving. When I preached the Tom Shaw, Bishop of Massachusetts, presided at his first same-sex covenant, marrying the president of the institution where I teach to a priest who was on his staff. And the title of my sermon was Dearly Beloved. It's the words that open that service, and it's about us all. that we are all dearly beloved. And it's an astounding ceremony when you hear it happen. Friends of ours in a parish watched two older gentlemen in a parish in Connecticut in their 70s be married. There wasn't a dry eye in that place. They had been together for 50 years. Not a dry eye. So we're blessed when we have those experiences and to be a part of them. I'll take one more. How are we doing now, Peter? I mean, it's planning.
We have
for
as much time as we want to take.
Okay.
I haven't seen anybody drifting for the door.
I'll go to the back and then to you, because I saw the hand up earlier with the gentleman in the back.
I often wonder how many people who are anti-blessings for same-sex couples have had relationships within their own family or friends. And if they had those types of situations, I don't know how they could possibly be opposed. I mean, I have a daughter, a lot of people know this, with a partner who's, they make the most special couple. And it's hard to, I'm not going to say hard, it's impossible to persuade a good deal or a good deal about that.
And I think as more and more of us have personal conversations and contacts with people who are gay or lesbian, that's true. And that's by, saying who we are and standing up straight and saying this is part of our life in this church. I was baptized in this church. I'm a member of this church. It's very touching, very painful. But one of the happiest days of my life when my father told me that he loved Dorothy, that he could accept her. And he wasn't saying she was my wife or anything like that. He didn't have that kind of language. We didn't have it. But he said, "Oh, she's like a French concierge. Her face, it is the map of Brittany and of welcome." Her name was Dorothy. So, I mean, that kind of tenderness, that kind of tenderness is hard to see pushed aside. Extraordinarily painful. My friends, thank you for waiting.
Certainly. If I had, say, a daughter or a son who had a partner, and I wanted to have them, or they wanted to be blessed in this church, how would that come about? Would there be that possibility? And I have not been around as much in the church, so I don't know exactly what's been transpiring, but that's just my question. You say that the congregation really is the church, this church. So if I had a friend or a child who was, who wanted to have their covenant blessed in this church, how would we go about it?
Well, there are a couple of things you would do. You would ask the rector, Peter, if that was something that he was able to do. He would talk with the vestry, he'd have his own opinion, and if he said no and the vestry said yes, then they'd have a decision to make. And they'd try to see if they could set up some sort of, could somebody else come in and do it? But you see, that's still a half baptism thing. It's tough. We say to our clergy, you do not have to do this. So the question is, what kind of, I'm going to use blunt language, pressure does the vestry want to put on the rector? And how much does the rector want to push back? And meanwhile, your friend or your family member is waiting, and that's the painful, and has already heard the message. So it's a painful conversation. Is that where you want to go and grow as a church? Is that what you want to celebrate for the next 100 years?
And I would say yes. And the reason I can put myself in this position is that I was born, I guess, and baptized in the Catholic Church. However, when I got divorced and the church said you cannot receive communion, I said I will not have part in a political group, because that is what organized religion is to me. It's a political group that says how I am valued as a person. And so when you talk about marriage, whether it's a heterosexual couple that's getting blessed in the church, or a same-sex couple that wants to be blessed in the church. It's the same thing. It's two people who want to dedicate their lives to their community, to their friends. So, you know, I was very lucky that I found the Episcopal Church and that my children were part of it, part of the wedding service, and they have committed themselves to being part of the Episcopal Church. Except for my oldest one, he doesn't know what he wants to do, but he's not against going to church either.
Yeah.
It's so important, and it's just as important for a man and a woman as two women. And I really resent the priest that in California left the church, went to the Catholic Church because we had a lesbian couple coming to services there. We're going to have to kill him. That's all there was to it. That's how I felt. It was like, how can you turn these people away? That's not right.
Susan and Matt,
I'm sorry to keep talking, but I do want to say one thing. When Earl and I were married, we could not be married in the Episcopal Church, and it was just awful. And I remember the minister saying to me, well, Susan, it's all right because you know, I have to know a congregational minister who was in New York, and he said, well, you're David Riedel married. I said, what does that have to do with me? And what does that have to do with Earl, who was a lifelong Episcopalian? Well, we can do something, and it made me so angry that I did not go back to church for quite a while. And I'm like you, I love my church. I love the Episcopal Church. And it was very hard for me and Earl, and it was because of a divorce.
it was divorced.
Yeah.
So
and
you'll understand how the people we were talking about earlier understand being packed up.
yeah, exactly.
So, I mean,
I remember, I forgot until Fredrica mentioned how many people were turned away in my husband's ministry because of the divorce. I mean, they were sent away for a year.
yeah,
That's what I was saying. Yeah, they said you could
not
come back.
understand it.
And I said, oh, I should live with Earl and his 4 children
Exactly.
for 4 months, and then we can get married. That's good. That was in the 50s too. So.
one more, and then I'm gonna try and do 3. Okay, stop at 3. Okay, yeah.
I was just thinking that one of the strongest forces for change is when our family or friends take this opposite position to our own. And then suddenly we think about it.
Yeah.
It happened with divorce, it happened with this, that, and the other, and it's probably happened.
And when you think about divorce, that was the big one. I mean, that you know, it's a major thing. Clergy in Great Britain still cannot be divorced. Yeah, and
They have women in 20 years?
they can have women priests. They cannot yet have women bishops. We're working on it. Hang on. Hang on. Lavinia, and then I saw a hand back there. Yes, ma'am. Good to see you. Lavinia.
Oh, I was going to say that I didn't mean to say this after Peter left, but I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's made me rethink the fact that I have left this congregation and gone up the street. And it's really an issue for me of a feeling of lack of inclusiveness, of, you know, opening our arms to everybody. And it's just not this issue of same-sex marriage. It's the issue of isn't our church opening our arms to everybody? And that sort of issue I've taken. Of course, I have very close friends who are gay, and I've seen very long-term relationships, and them having to wait a very long time to be married. And had the good fortune of going to a civil service in New York City, and feeling very, you know, just so happy for them that they were able to legally be married.
What I wanted to say is I was so honored to be able to go to a civil service at City Hall in Providence, Rhode Island, a couple of weeks ago. A wonderful, wonderful friends of ours who have been together for 15 years. And again, they had many friends coming in to support them. They were married by a judge.
And it was just absolutely beautiful, and this summer they will be married, they will be blessed at our house with 150 people. This young, one of the people was very instrumental in getting the equality bill passed in Rhode Island, so it was very special.
These are special, special weekends. And when our lives personally are touched, and I think it's being touched by God's grace and God's love, then we sometimes change our minds and think anew in a different direction. Personal is political. An old feminist saying, yeah, you use that. Happy word. Friends, there's work to do. There's prayers to do. And I wish you extraordinarily well. And I'm going to, if I may, find those pages that I promised. Showing that we Xerox. Are they in the other room?
Oh, I didn't photocopy anything other than the handouts. Do we need?
There's the 8 pages.
Oh, you have something in the red folder.
Yeah, red folder.
Did it make it?
Thank you very much. Lots of relatives here.
Is that it for me?
Yeah.
I'm good. Perfect.
So what you have here is Stephanie's article, 4-page article on says young people, why it's important to young people. Okay? You know, I mean, I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 42, but you know, we got to keep these young folks around. The young people. And Patrick's article about how he worked with his family. You're willing to read a couple of articles and then see if some of you want to get together and talk about them and see what that has to do with your life and spirit. Huh? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for being here.
Fredrica, thank you.
Susan always gets me in trouble. I will follow you.
I'd like to say one thing. I want to thank Fredrica, but I want to thank the privilege I had of being on the board at EES. And it was because of Free's husband Bob who got me in trouble. And when I called Fredrica to say, could you possibly come and help us, I read her book, and she said, of course. What do you mean? Of course I'll come. That's the kind of place EES is. And we want to remember that when we contribute.
School's a trustee, always a trustee.
Contribute to our divinity schools as we do every year. How's that? Get better.
I also thank everyone who chose to stay for this time or to join us after this service. I hope that you will read the articles that Fredrica circulated, reflect on the questions that she's given us, come and speak to me and to members of the vestry about how we can intentionally continue this in this church and maybe break open some of the logjam that I think many of us have felt over the last several months. I really want to hear from you about how this conversation should continue.